And we're back. Welcome to Abstractable. This is the podcast for the entrepreneurial spirit of the curious, the hungry, and those who want to learn with us. We distill down the ideas from the world's best thinkers in business, startups, psychology, and today is politics. And today we're bringing you A Promised Land by Barrack Obama.
Yeah, so in the episode, we discuss what it's like to go from an ordinary citizen one day to becoming the president of the United States the next. Also, what it's like to make decisions on some of the most complex problems in the world, like the GFC, some of the environmental disasters that happened in Obama's first term, and the multiple wars that the US was fighting at the time. We also talk about Obama's habits and rituals and what keeps him at his best. Well, why are we looking at this book? Well, it's fascinating insight into what doing the hardest job in the world is like and how Obama managed to pull it off. So don't forget you can find full video from our episodes on YouTube and check out our website at abstractable.co. We hope you enjoy the episode. And one last note, if you enjoyed it, we'd appreciate it if you let someone else know about the show. Cheers.
So, mate, we're in our third set for this year.
Third set of what?
Well, or at least our third recording set. And, at least a part of the recording set has changed. And in this case, it's mine.
You're always on the move. I'm always in the same room and you're gallivanting around. Where are you now?
Yeah, but that means that the set has changed technically. A portion of the set changes, the whole set changes.
Yeah, it's just you're living this exciting life. So tell me, where are you now?
I don't know how exciting you'd call living in. What do you call what do you refer to these huts as, Lockie?
They're called dongers.
Dongers. And where does that name come from?
I think it's a FIFO term. It's like a mining term for the little hut that you live in when you're away from home in Gladstone or something, working in the mines. But why are you in a donger?
I'm in a donger because we have just arrived back in Australia. Right. So,
Huge.
You know what's so huge about that is we don't have anywhere near the amount of lag that we've had all year. So we've got no excuses for recording.
No, exactly. It's got to be absolutely all our fault if there are any uncomfortable pauses or anything like that. So How many COVID tests have you had? That's what I want to know, because it feels like every time you move, you have to get a COVID test, right?
Yes, basically. So we've only had two since being here, one on arrival, and we've passed the I've put the 7th scratch on the wall here, so we're at day 7. So we're at day 8. So I've already lost track of time. And so 2 here, we had a couple 2 or 3 before we left, but we also had to pass through from Switzerland to Germany, so we had to have one before that as well, although it wasn't clear whether we really did have to have one in the end. So I've had a few.
Yeah, that is a lot. Sorry, like the old dog barking in the background there.
You haven't got any burglars coming into their house, mate?
It was just Christy actually coming home from the neighbour's house. So
okay.
On high alert, bang. That is crazy. And so you're just used to it now. It doesn't hurt or anything, because people have different experiences with these tests, Like, it depends sort of like how your face is, I reckon, and who's doing it. But any difference in Australia than overseas?
I'll tell you, guess where the most thorough test is being done?
Germany.
Not in Europe.
Yeah, okay, right. Okay, I thought it might be the Germans, but it's back here, is it?
Yeah, it's definitely back here, mate. We've here is like full. Get this like bristly thing, shove it into the back of your throat, both sides of the back of the throat, and then both nostrils up the nose, to a place that feels like it's going into the back of the brain. Whereas over in over in Europe, I reckon I had one of the tests, and I think they were using almost like a cotton bud, so it was quite soft.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
But like a really thin cotton bud,
right.
as opposed to
gotcha.
these bristly, like you know what you clean glasses with, you know, like when you're washing the dishes. So here we've got one of those, like bristles getting up your up your schnoz, and then over there it was like this like mini cotton bud, and I think I don't even know if it's almost like they didn't even scrape my bloody throat and nose. You know, you almost didn't even feel it. So I've had the whole spectrum, I think, but.
So it's certainly not hotel quarantine for you. It's mining camp quarantine.
Yeah, which I actually
probably
think,
nicer.
I think it is. I think because we had to do 3 days in a hotel before we left as part of like our quarantine, and so that was in a hotel, and you know you're not allowed to leave your room for those 3 days, and you know I think the aircon wasn't really working in our room, which probably made it more stuffy, but it just felt a bit stuffy in the room. So I can imagine after 2 weeks, people are really wanting a bit of fresh air.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas here we've got the luxury of having a bit of fresh air, which is quite nice.
Well, enjoy it. What better thing to do than record a podcast while you're there?
I know. So you're gonna have to put up with a heavy dose of rain. So I'm up in Darwin. If there's we've had a couple of big downpours today. So in case there's a bit of noise, that's where it's coming from.
Fair enough. So what are we talking about today?
We are talking about Barack Obama, the man.
So his biography, or autobiography, I guess, A Promised Land, we listened to on Audible, all 26 hours of it, so that you don't have to. No, it is good. Check it out, but it's a longie. My brother recommended this, and I got stuck in and then recommended it to you. It's a very interesting insight into his the first 4 years of his presidency and a little bit of preamble about his life before that.
So, mate, launching into this, you know, you follow the American politics a little bit, don't you? Well, certainly more than what I probably do.
I do. I got right into it probably over the last 4 years with everything that's happened over there.
I think the whole world's been forced to.
Yeah.
That's all that's been displayed everywhere.
Yeah, so you could say I'm probably like a very low level knowledge, but yeah.
So we'll call you today's expert then.
All right, cool.
Today's expert on the US politics arena.
The pundit. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, mate, what was your take on Obama? Did you have much or know much about his presidency
before the book? Yeah. Look, I wouldn't say I knew the guy or felt like I did, but
that's something about him. That is something about him. You feel like he's your mate in some ways.
Afterwards, he's very relatable after you kind of listen to this. But, you know, I was pretty interested when he first got elected and got it seemed like this kind of wave for this guy who was such a brilliant speaker and carried so much hope. And at the time I actually wrote a small letter to The Age about it when I was at uni. Fun fact.
Really? And what did the letter entail, mate? Tell us about the letter.
It was only about 2 or 3 lines.
Do we get to do a episode on that letter?
You wouldn't be able to. I'll tell you what it is right now. I think I said something like he was a great hope, but let's wait and see sort of thing was the theme, you know, because he was promising big was kind of my feeling. But I was excited that he'd been elected, and I was a fan. And
this is good. This is one of the themes for our talk today.
Yeah. And I also read a book about the race that he did. The race, because, you know, in America you have to win the nomination by your party before you go into the general election against the other party. Well, I read a book, which I'll look up so I can get the name of it, but effectively it was sort of like it was detailing Clinton's versus Obama and that kind of battle for the primary. And that was super interesting as well, given it was kind of the establishment versus this up-and-comer, and that was pretty cool to see what he did. And then during his presidency, I was like kind of, and this is something I want to talk about in this episode, is that I felt as though while he was trying, like how much can the president actually do? And that was kind of my feeling by the end of it, is that it doesn't really matter how brilliant you are. There's only so much you can actually get done. Given the mechanisms of the office.
Yeah, it's kind of one thing that, for someone that's as ignorant as I am about it all, this whole concept of the filibuster and everything else that surrounds that just seems like a beyond broken system to me.
So what is the filibuster, just as people who don't know?
Again, the ignorant version is that
if you're here for look, let's just put this up front. If you're here for the facts about the politics rather than opinions, go somewhere else. All right, just switch off now.
Politics all opinions?
Yeah. If you want some like technical answers about the exact number of votes it requires, which I think is 66, but that means you can get through without the filibuster or whatever in the Senate. You probably need to head somewhere else, because we're just going to fly through this with a few rough, you might call us bush political analysts, if you like. We know enough to get by, and that's about it. So, but we're going to talk about Obama and his fantastic book. But
I think you call it know enough to get in trouble. And there's no better way to get in trouble than talk about politics. So the concept of the filibuster is basically that in the States, even with the majority in the Senate and the House, is that right? Right?
It's the Senate.
The Senate that you need to, which is, I don't know how many seats in total, 70 something. Is that a fair? It's 80 something.
I don't know maybe the total seats, but I think so. Let's say you get 51% of the vote or something.
Yeah, 51% of the vote.
That's not
doesn't
enough.
cut it.
No.
Yeah, you need to get more than two thirds of the vote because of some. He basically draws it back to some. He refers to him as like a myopic theorist or something like that. Some person, some guy that came up with the concept that basically you could debate things until the cows come home, and as long as someone on the opposition side had something to say on a matter, you could continue to say things on a matter, and the matter couldn't be resolved unless there was a supermajority gained in the Senate, and that supermajority requires like 66 or 70% or something like that of the votes in order to get through, which basically never happens.
Yeah, so you can get up in the Senate and just basically play for time until it gets to, and so you can get up and read all of Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, and people like read Green Eggs and Ham and stuff and do all this stupid stuff. And as long as you just keep talking, they can just stall it. And yeah, basically, there's an option to get rid of it if you want. Someone could rule a motion like Biden now could say, "No, we're getting rid of the filibuster," but that they know that when they get voted out, they want to use it. So no one's game to actually get rid of it because both sides like to use it when they're in opposition. So it's just one of those things. It's like, twisting the laws of the Senate to kind of do some weird stuff. But yeah,
it's like the ultimate Mexican standoff, or it's like the ultimate, But it all shows that they're all bloody politicians too, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like, well, yeah, it's tough. It's a tough thing. And the problem is, mate, is for something like that that's been in the system now for so long, it's kind of baked into culture in some ways. And so that's the bit that takes a long time to untangle.
Well, this is what's so interesting about Obama and I guess politics is that, you know, what does it say about his presidency that straight afterwards Trump was elected? How does that affect his legacy? I don't know the answer, but that seems to be like quite an interesting kind of thing, is that straight after his 8 years that they went for the most out there candidate ever, you know. So yeah, it's complicated.
Tell us about Obama, mate.
Barrack Hussein Obama II is his actual name, and he kind of comments in the book that it's a miracle. Anything's possible in America if you can be called Hussein and Obama, which sounds somewhat like Osama, and become president. So he was born August 4th in 1961 in Honolulu, Hawaii, despite what Donald Trump might say. He was born in America. So his mum was sort of from English descent, and she was born in Wichita, Kansas. And his father was a Kenyan man and who came over to America, and they met in a Russian language class at the University of Hawaii. So his father was a foreign exchange student, or a foreign student on a scholarship, I should say. And his father actually went on to go to Harvard, which Obama would do as well. So they got in a whirlwind romance. They got married in 1961, 6 months before Obama was born, and they filed for divorce in 1964. So it was a quick marriage that didn't last. And effectively, he didn't really know his dad that well, you know. He really grew up with his mum, who, with another partner, they moved to Indonesia when he was about 6 years old, and he lived in Indonesia from the age of 6 to 10. And, you know, having sort of that background of living overseas kind of really shaped his life quite a lot, I think, had a big impact on him.
Have you seen that documentary Barry on Netflix?
No.
I think it's called Barry. It's about Barrack, and I think it's everything. It's been a while since I've seen it. Everything in the lead up to him meeting Michelle. I think, or he just puts eyes on Michelle. I think is the kind of ending thing, and you're like, you know, one of those cliffhanger moments, and wait for the next season. It's a movie. So anyway, they talk about the life in Indonesia, or portrays the life in Indonesia, and you know, it seems that he is just always studying and always working, and it seemed like this was a really kind of forming period of his life there.
Yeah, really interesting. I'd love to look at that. I'll check it out. But he certainly jumped around. So like in 1971, he returned to Honolulu and lived with his maternal grandparents, who he was very close with. And they were his mother's parents. And so he lived with them for a while. Then he lived with his mum again, and then she moved for a job, and he stayed in. By this stage, he was a late teenager or something, and he stayed in Honolulu with his grandparents. And so, yeah, it was kind of this upbringing where he didn't really know his dad, and his mum had a few relationships, and he also lived with his grandparents. So, you know, not a super stable home life. So in 1981, after he'd finished high school and some other studies, he transferred from I believe he was still in Hawaii at the time, but he transferred to Columbia University, and he graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in 1983, and he did very well. He was a good student. And he talks in the book around this time about sort of this is a formative period for him about creating his political ideology and thinking about everything and the like. So in terms of his personal life, around 1983, he went on and spent time as a community organiser. And in 1989, after he'd been working for a while, and he enrolled in Harvard in 1988, he met Michelle Robinson in 1989. And they were he was doing a summer associate because he was studying to be a lawyer at this time at a Chicago law firm. And they fell in love. And they were married in 91 and had their daughters, Malia and Sasha, in 1998 and 2001. And so, but basically he went to Harvard, and this is where his life kind of took a real turn, because he was selected editor of the Harvard Law Review at the end of his first year and president of the journal in his second year. And this is the first time there'd ever been a black president of the Harvard Law Review. So he's starting to this could be his first political position, I would say. Because
I feel like there's an air around that Harvard Law Review, and people going on to, be in politics or in high positions in politics? Is that the...
Yeah, it's a very prestigious thing, highly sought after, and you're kind of ordained to go and do something. It gained so much attention that someone gave him a book deal on the back of it. So that's when he wrote Dreams from My Father, which was his first book. Well, it was his first book. And isn't that interesting that he'd made such an impact at that point? Someone wanted him to write a book.
And I guess going back then, I imagine the prestige was maybe even higher than what it maybe is today, because it seems that, I don't know, it feels like some of the prestige used to be the gateway in order to do anything of that higher claim in some ways. And now I think that that distinction seems to be reducing, and maybe just because of the advent of technology and that. But fascinating, mate. And he's quite young too, to be asked to write a book by a publisher and, be the president of the Harvard Law Review. He's a clever dude, clearly.
Oh, and, it clearly shows he's able to kind of be comfortable in many worlds. He's got this kind of his white mother and his black father, and he's kind of, while he's stuck between two worlds of identity and his identity, which he talks about, it also meant that he could kind of he could uniquely roll between different worlds and fit in, and that's one of his many gifts, I think, besides being an incredibly intelligent, charismatic person.
And I think that probably becomes from, a big part of that probably comes from that, as you mentioned, that slightly unstable upbringing that he is actually able to. He was fortunate enough to be able to be given, a really good education, but at the same time he was living in some poorer circumstances.
Yeah.
And then obviously once he continued on beyond like the prestigious world of Harvard, he moved into becoming an organizer and a political organizer, and so he's on the front line talking with workers and very much working class and people unfortunately struggling to pay for their livelihoods even though they're working full time or multiple jobs type of thing, as is I think a very common symptom in the States. So being on that front line, I think, has really helped him with that relatability across the spectrum.
Mm. So he was elected to the Illinois Senate in 1996, and this is kind of his first big foray into real politics, and this was in effectively the Chicago kind of area. But effectively, he kind of stuck it out there for a while. And this was a really tricky time for him. He had a young family. It was way harder on Michelle than it was him, because she was looking after the kids while he was out away in Springfield doing these, being a senator, trying to balance his family life, not really being there to help. And this was before they were famous, He's just like a random senator. He got massive student loans. They've got no money. They're living in not tough conditions, but it certainly wasn't the glamorous lifestyle. And he was sort of like, at this point, well, what do I do? Do I keep going with politics, or do I go become a lawyer and earn some money? And he kind of had this kind of choice, and he kind of convinced Michelle to give him another shot, one more shot at politics. And he, in 2004, was elected to the US Senate. He wrote another book, and he did his speech at the 2004 Democratic Convention, which was a very famous speech. And if you get a chance, just Google it and watch it. I think it goes for about 16 minutes. And when I was rereading this, I watched it again, and it's an amazing speech. And if you can think of the time as well, it just absolutely, everyone's like, who the hell is this, And 4 years later, he was president.
It's unbelievable. It was like that ultimate, movie scene, the hero's journey, and he's at that final breaking point, and then he asks for the one more ticket, one more chance, and then with that, he was able to get through, mate.
And Michelle's sort of like, how the hell did you actually pull this off? But, she is such an important figure in his life, and an amazing person in her own right. And she really didn't love the politics at all, She's kind of a somewhat unwilling participant in it. She hates politics, but she's kind of made the most of it and turned herself into used it as a force for good, I think.
Yeah, I haven't read her book Becoming, but I've heard good things about it. So
yeah, we should do that.
I'd love to.
So there was I skipped over a lot of stuff and it jumps around a little in my bio, but you kind of get the idea of where he's come from.
I'm glad he was doing his autobiography, mate, and you weren't writing the biography.
Thanks. But I wanted to read this quote because I think it kind of leads into what the book really talks about, which is, him becoming president and being president for the first 4 years. He's actually going to write another one for his second term, which I assume he's working on now. But he says, you don't choose the time chooses you. Either you seize what may turn out to be the only chance you have, or you decide you're willing to live with the knowledge that the chance has passed you by. And I think this theme runs throughout the book, is that there was just his life seemed to get swept up in this movement that he kind of created and rode the back of in some sort of like intermingled way where, he was kind of fueling it, but it was fueling him, and all of a sudden he's gone from like a senator in the Illinois Senate, which is really a dodgy place, away from his family, broke, huge student debts, troubled marriage, to riding Air Force One 12 years later, and making history.
Yeah, it's an incredible transformation, right? And just there's something they talk about and I feel like this applies in a lot of different places, and like in the markets, for example, people that particularly go for long-term investments, holds, in the crypto community they call it hodls. there's only a few like major points in the market where things really jump up quite a lot, and unless you're in the market at those particular points in time, then you kind of miss the boat. And I feel like this is pretty similar, although maybe the difference here is you probably have a little bit more insight on the opportunities. You probably have a little bit more tactical feel about when those moments are coming, because I'm almost going to say no one, but very few people in the world really know when that's happening in the market. So I think having a little bit of a guise on your own life and trying to have a little bit of awareness about what is actually happening around you, particularly as these big like sweeping waves come up around you, can change your life. And that's seen in that 4-year timeline between, and really, mate, it's less than 4-year timeline. It's kind of like a 1-year timeline, because it was almost like 1 year that he was non-existent political candidate, then all of a sudden he was a political candidate and he was rallying huge crowds, and that was probably across the space of 12 months. And even after that, he's kind of shifted his entire life, even if he didn't probably become president,
Yeah, absolutely. You got to read the moment.
So maybe just on the moment, mate. For me, I had to kind of cast myself back, because this is 2007, 2008. By the time he's become president, and so that's quite a long time ago. And at that time, the iPhone, for example, like we're at bloody iPhone, I don't even know what number now, iPhone 12 or 11, and the iPhone had only just come out at this point in time. The GFC, global financial crisis, was in full swing. The Arab Spring was becoming, very much the big ISIS movement that we recognise. I can't remember when that big, that huge thing about, the ISIS in Syria and all that took place, but I think it was somewhere around then as well, or just after.
I think it was after, yeah, but they're all kind of. It's certainly that was the start of some instability in the region. Yeah,
and I'd say that like climate change was just a completely different word than, or phrase than what it is today.
It was global warming back then.
Yeah, global warming. And then it's all the classic arguments about, is it really rising or it's not rising? And anyway, I think we've moved on from that. And then something that really stuck out for me, mate, was he points out that there was like Confederate flags still on the state building in South Carolina, which seems just quite strange.
Yeah, it's weird.
So a very interesting, point in time, and quite. It actually feels like quite a long time ago.
Yeah, well, it is. But even more so, to your point about the fast-changing world we live in. So, but yeah, even in that first 4 years, to have to deal with the GFC, as well as say all these other things that are happening in the world, it's pretty full on.
Yeah.
So I was kind of struck by the point of like, well, what can we actually take from this book? Because he is a politician and he is writing effectively his own history here. And I think that's a big point of political memoirs, is to kind of quickly get out your version of events, although it took a while to write this book. So what do you think? What did you take from this book and what were you a bit wary of?
Yeah, this is the same thing struck me throughout, mate. And I was trying to not be biased on it and seeing, him as a politician and just trying to see it from like a biographical, autobiographical standpoint for him. But there really felt like points in time where he was like jimmying that lever in to like make that mark in time about, hey, this is that particular thing that we did, and hey, if you're going to remember me, this is how you need to remember me by, type thing. Certainly felt like that, and I guess that's what you do in an autobiography too. I guess that's why you go out and write one in the first place. So there was moments that felt like that. Understandably, there was moments that felt like he was trying to defend some of the decisions that they made throughout their time. It feels like there was like a lot of quite disastrous events throughout those two terms. It was quite a rough period, but it's hard to gauge because prior to that, I was probably too young to be at all engaged with politics. Even the little that I am probably engaged compared to some today.
Yeah, so you were a bit wary of, the way he was trying to shape certain things.
Yeah.
So what was interesting about the book for you then?
Oh, I just loved the. It felt real, and it did feel like him, and it probably helps that he was reading the books. So really recommend the audio book for this one. He has a very cool and calm nature about him, and I think that's one of the appeals. Is he's such a good speech maker. He has a very good voice. He's able to talk quite well through things. He's got that very like calming of the storm, kind of like he walks into a room of chaos and it feels like things just calm down a little bit, or get a little bit slower,
Yeah, he's got presence, It's like Arnold, he's got a presence about him that just, you feel it when he's talking, when he's reading the book, and when you see him speak. It's just something about him that you're drawn to him. Yeah.
We might have to do an analysis on that. We've done like a suite of creativity, what do you call them? Breakdowns. There's a better word for it though. Anyway, dive into creativity and what makes creativity. I think we're gonna have to do a dive into like presence and these people that create presence. Because it really is. And whilst I would say that Arnie and Obama are like on the opposite ends of the scale in terms of what that type of presence actually is when they walk into the room, it seems like Arnie walks in the room, it is fucking chaos. Whereas Obama walks in the room, everything just kind of slows down, a couple of degrees, and each has its own. Well, you look at Arnie, and he's become effectively the president of one of the biggest countries in the world, being this, the state of California, in its own right. So that's an interesting take. Probably a key aspect of anyone wanting to go into any sort of position like that is that charisma and presence.
Yeah, it struck me that, like, I agree, very relatable. It was sort of like what it's like to be a normal person who's very ambitious, who then becomes the president of the United States, and what that's actually like. I felt like you could really connect to that for him, and he was quite honest, I believe, about some of the feelings that he had during that, and that was very interesting, to be in such a high-pressure situation and how you handle that. And I also found fascinating the fact that sort of the structure of the actual role and what it entailed. So like what he spent his time doing, what sort of staff he had around him, what he did versus others, and kind of what the presidency means to people, and the way that they treated him with such reverence was quite interesting, and quite an interesting idea that basically there's so much ritual around the president that it gives you a certain amount of power just through the ritual of it, if that makes sense. Like he was Barrack until 2009 when he got sworn in or whatever it was, and then he was Mr. President. And everything was different.
Yeah, and particularly, you kind of already know the end of the story before you start it. But, if you hadn't have known that and you were reading the story without having known his life already, you would read that and be like, he's just a normal guy and he's just a small-time political player. And then all of a sudden he's just thrust into this politics. And you kind of juxtapose that against someone like Hillary Clinton, who's, she was trying to become president at that point in time as well when he was running. And you see, I see her as more of a, that career politician type person, as opposed to, it felt like he came from like that real grassroots on the coalface, and then all of a sudden he was kind of thrust into the president. So maybe, he wasn't ready for it, but who is ready for president if they haven't been president? It sounds like you can't practice to be the president, I don't think.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'd be interested I don't know enough about Hillary's early days to really know what she did before she was First Lady, but certainly since Bill was the president, they've been kind of the entrenched political family along with the Bushes for quite a while. So I think that was interesting, the kind of spiritual nature of the presidency and the power that entails, as well as like how you turn a normal person into someone who can run the biggest country or the biggest economy in history, the biggest country, et cetera, et cetera. That was super interesting. And then how he kind of handled the pressure and made decisions, I thought was pretty fascinating too.
Yeah, which we will definitely get into. So I think that's quite nice, mate. What you mentioned about that kind of rise up to power and the momentum that comes with it, because he mentions throughout the book that because of that, it's almost that speed of that momentum that came around him. Initially, it felt like he was running. And then after some time during the race, it felt like he was just a vessel for this movement, and that the movement was, far bigger than he was, which is, maybe the case. But it's quite interesting that both sides of the political spectrum were actually able to use this. So the Republican side was weaponizing that and using that against, and the Democratic side was using it to try and bring on the supporters and the aspirations. And so he basically started to embody something that was just far greater than who he was as this normal person. And so it's like you've got this. It's almost like you got this spirit animal riding above the person. So some of the really interesting elements where throughout the campaign and that make his situation kind of unique was he just started the race, right? And normally this this only happens for like a president or a vice president if they are running. This is the only time this typically had happened. He was like assigned a secret service, like a dedicated secret service, and I mentioned before about the Confederate flag on the state building in South Carolina. It just feels strange that that's in the 2000s. You know what I mean? And the reason was it's just huge security threats against him. And he actually mentions that they obviously came up to him and said, "Hey, there is a lot of chatter on the lines about with your name ringing quite loud, so we need to look after you."
Terrifying. Yeah, and I think the other thing was like some people in the black community would come up to him and Michelle and just say, sort of almost preempt his assassination in a way and say, I'm sorry. Almost seeing it in the future, which is terrifying,
It would take some grit to get through that.
Yeah, get up on
for the whole
stage.
family. It was just
Well, yeah. How do you run up on the stage, when that?
Yeah, I don't know. You have to trust in the crew that's looking after you, I guess. That's all you can do.
Once you're out,
decide how badly you want it.
either. Yeah, that's it.
Nah. And so there was many of these like ideological challenges that presented themselves, I think, throughout the course of the first, certainly the first term, and we've probably seen that really, rise up, particularly even over the last 12 months, and in the lead up to the last 12 months, it's just been a continual kind of build of those really deep rooted ideological movements and things. So one of the really interesting ones for me, mate, was just getting some insights on the Israeli-Palestine situation that he had to deal with and had to go through, and the challenge that they faced as the US backing the Israeli side, and then all of a sudden they were facing challenges from because they were becoming, they were far stronger than the Palestinian side is the read on it, and basically they were encroaching on the Palestinian settlements. Now that kind of does away with all the militia attacks and everything else that was happening, and the continual violence and threat of violence that was in the area. But there was just this, really like deep-rooted, long existing political divide that he had to be incredibly involved in, and then was basically like crucified for in terms of the decision making that he had to make around it, which ended up being that they had to like basically tell Israel to hold back on what they were doing and not support what they were doing, and then all of a sudden, it's just everything blew up, not literally, but I'm sure things did
Politically,
but, politically, and huge challenge. But I found it interesting that the level of interventionism that is kind of tied into or keyed into the global environment, mate. And there's a lot of people that are totally against that interventionism, and then obviously people that are very much for it.
Yeah. Well, I guess it comes back to, again, we live in a complex world. Say going into Iraq caused all sorts of consequences that no one predicted at the time. The Middle East is so complex. I wouldn't even begin to pretend to understand it. So I guess it kind of depends. Like he talks about Libya and how they went in there and did a quick sort of fix that saved a lot of lives. And that's probably interventionism going right. But, how much moral responsibility does someone like the US actually have in the world to do good, and how much bad are they doing that you don't hear about? How much bad are they doing? Because that's the nature of geopolitics, is that it's a dog-eat-dog world, and you've got to back some militias and you've got to do this and that people don't want to know about. I don't know. So I don't really have a clean answer to it. I guess you've got to be – my only thought really is that beware of unknown consequences, and also, I suppose, try and really look at what you're getting yourself into before you you do. You can't fix everything.
Yeah. It's beyond because this is like the ultimate complexity that you can get to basically in a problem, because it's like it's the largest and the greatest, differences in culture and number of moving parts and waves of on-flow effects that can occur as a result of any decision that's made at this kind of geopolitical level. But as you say, mate, it's very much dog eat dog world. And so, you've got proponents on the side that there should be no interventionism. But like, what happens to, there's a number of countries and places that would just be totally gobbled up by other powers straight away, and millions of lives lost, no doubt, or many lives lost.
I think likely the way that these people think about it, though, is that, okay, if that country gets gobbled up, what does that mean for my country? As opposed to, there's a huge amount of pragmatism as opposed to like doing it for altruistic reasons. And I think that like there's the nature of international relations is it's really brutal. It doesn't operate on the same way as, this Nassim quote where I think he said, I'm a communist with my family, but a libertarian at a country level or something, because I'm probably misquoting him there. Maybe libertarian's a little bit too far, but the idea that,
I think you've hit it on the head, mate. I even think it's maybe even further to, I don't even know what further to the right is than that, but it's like an aggressor basically with your country at the country level.
Because
I think,
and it comes back to like, I think it's quite an insightful quote, even though I probably maybe don't agree with where he takes it to on the larger scale, but is that in your family, everyone, and there's personal accountability. In a small town, you'll leave your bike unlocked around because everyone kind of knows each other. So there's this kind of personal accountability piece in your community. And then when you move to Amsterdam, well, you don't leave your bike unlocked, do you? And you don't say hi to everyone.
There's so many bloody bikes, you just leave it unlocked. No one cares. You pick up another one.
You pick up another. They're like, they're interchangeable. And then, so as you go further and further out, you see this on the internet, the anonymous things that happen under the power of anonymity are ridiculous. If you don't know and you're not going to see what happens, you're more likely to do stuff that's, I suppose not really moral, I guess, in this truest sense. And then, so there needs to be more things in place to kind of stop that. And then you take that up and up and up a level and you end up in international relations where it's almost like there's no rules. Like everyone's spying on each other, they're hacking each other, they're attacking one another, they're not, it's absolutely crazy. And so it's very hard I think that's kind of just part of the game as much as you don't want it to be. If one side's doing it, that doesn't mean there's no rules as such. I just mean that it's different. It's a much more brutal than something that you would have in your own community.
Yeah, well...
That, just to clarify, that doesn't mean people should go around killing other people or taking over other countries or... No, it's nothing like that. It's no justification for anything. It's just... these are hard discussions, decisions. People die, with this stuff, and it's full on.
Well, I think taking it the other way, mate, is I suspect there's a lot of people that don't realise just how brutal it is out there. Like you mentioned in the world of the cyber stuff going on, it is literally constant war. And for some reason, there is far different rules of engagement there is no rules of engagement essentially, and far different rules around countries attacking other countries in some ways, because you can just kind of say it wasn't us, is effectively what happens. And it's just so interesting because if you don't have a robust a robust systems in place, you don't have experts. You don't have the kind of the skill set and capability. Capability is like a very military orientated word, and they use it to describe the ability to do certain things, on the military landscape. If you don't have the capability to do that, then you will certainly be undermined. And so I think the worst thing to do is kind of dig the head in the sand about that, or think that doesn't go on. It certainly does. It's just that there is thankfully increasing systems in place and treaties in place that help shift these things away from being violent in nature and just be at debate level. But, you start seeing things also flow into the financial sphere as well. And, the financial sphere has a lot to play. And this is where you get into trade wars and currency wars and all kinds of things. And all that stuff is seeking to undermine the other country. And so, in a way, it's an act of aggression.
And I think he was pretty pragmatic in the book of trying to balance his principles of human rights and helping people versus the pragmatism of international relations. Something I think why he was so relatable as well is that he was in touch with the culture of the younger generation. Like, he wasn't like, look at this. I mean, Joe Biden's feels like he's relatable, but he's old, right? Like, whereas Obama, he's not on the golf course, he's shooting hoops to wind down, and he understands he kind of feels like, you could know him.
I feel like Obama could teach you a little bit of lingo, whereas I feel like that Biden has had to be taught the lingo to use,
Yeah, and just the way that's true. I don't know, just the way you feel like you could sit down and have a conversation with him, and it's not like talking to your dad.
Your great-grandfather. Yeah, I agree, mate.
So his habits.
Yeah, well, I was trying to think of
man of many habits.
He is a man of many habits. And we mentioned earlier about his time in Indonesia in that documentary, and, one of the scenes a couple of the scenes is just him like reading. And he was apparently just a voracious reader, just endless all the time, just reading books. And to the point that when he was in year 10, he was reading like Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Like, that's some pretty deep shit, mate.
Absolutely.
And so I imagine this has been a big, forming part for his ability to understand the world, his ability to interact with people, and then also tied in with that is his writing, which is probably just as prolific as what his reading is. From what I took away, he basically journals every single day. Still likes to use the handwritten journal, and when he was in office, he would make a set habit and a set time throughout each day to basically take in a bunch of letters from the people of the United States and read them and get some direct insight, which I think was the canvas is blank when you walk into the presidency in a lot of respects, and so you can kind of choose to do what you wish and how you wish to do it. So, this was one of the things that he just had set into his diary each day.
Yeah, I liked that because it meant he didn't get stuck in an ivory tower as much. I thought that was quite a good idea. It's super interesting, his kind of habitual nature. But there's no one we've talked about who doesn't love to read, is there?
Maybe we're biased towards those books, mate. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe someone that's had a book written about them or writes a book in the first place is. I think there's a bias in that. There's a systematic bias, mate, in our show.
People who love to learn end up writing books maybe. I don't know, but it's certainly a theme that comes through.
So and I think the writing, mate, goes on to help him with his decision making that you mentioned earlier. So do you want to tell us a little bit about his approach to decision making?
This is probably my biggest takeaway from the book, is that it was really just one little paragraph that kind of, among everything else, but it really stuck out to me. And he was kind of talking about how he approached the tough decisions of his presidency, and he came up with this kind of system. He said that rather than let myself get paralyzed in the quest for a perfect solution or succumb to the temptation to just go with my gut every time, I created a sound decision-making process, one where I first really listened to the experts. Then I followed the facts, considered my goals, and then weighed all of that against my principles. Then, no matter how things turned out, I would at least know I'd done my best with the information that was in front of me. And that, to me, that was like a really interesting kind of framework that you could kind of, because it seemed to me the job is basically making decisions, as far as I could tell from reading this book, is you get plonked in the chair. You've got a little bit of leeway around how you receive information, what your schedule's like. But really, you've got this kind of apparatus around you, and people come in and go, hey, this has happened. All right, here's 6 experts, or here's the Joint Chiefs of Staff, here's your Chief of Staff, here's your political advisor, here's this, here's that. All right, tell me about the problem. Well, this rig has burst and it's spewing oil into the
Tell you what, that was a fucking disaster, wasn't it?
Oh my God. And then you've got like your economic advisor, your environmental advisor, your political advisor, and they're telling you all the angles. And then they say, Mr. President, what do you want to do? And then he kind of says,
I don't know.
Oh, shit. And he would go through this process. And I think it's really quite a good one, because it kind of, at the end, it goes from the problem all the way up to what you're about. You start at the problem and the cause-effect relationships. You listen to the people who know what they're talking about. Then you bring that back to your intermediate goals, which are, beyond probably more tactical, and then you bring it back to these value judgments around your principles. And I've taken that and tried to adapt it to my own life as well when I'm dealing with issues.
I feel like, mate, well, when you read a few strategy books, and I'm really thinking here, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and it's a really, really popular strategy book. It really talks about that connecting of what you've said there is you've got this bunch of information in front of you, which is the experts. And, when it's experts, you've got good information or better information than you can get anywhere else, you'd hope. And so connecting it back to the goals is a step that's very rarely taken, even in the business context. Usually it's, here's a bunch of information, now let's just go this way type thing is usually the kind of business operational sense. Whereas always checking it back to those goals is such a powerful thing. But what's so fascinating is how he takes it, that extra abstraction back to it's almost like you're kind of trying to find the point from which you're shooting, and where the kernel really rests, and then drawing a line all the way through it. So all the way back to the kernel of what your values are and how you kind of exist within the world, and then you take it to the next step to kind of point that towards the goals that you're doing in this current context, and then you take it out another level to the information that's there, and then all of a sudden you're making a decision on that. So those two major steps I think are really, really important without even knowing what his principles are, because it'd be great to know what those principles were too, but I don't think it necessarily matters. The point is the steps to be taken.
Yeah, I agree. Another interesting little quote was, sometimes your most important work involved the stuff that nobody noticed. Isn't that true of everything?
To be honest, mate, it's probably the most true thing, because you only really hear about the winners. You never hear about second place, and you certainly never hear about the losers.
Or you never hear about the thing that never happened that you prevented, or
Yeah, that's it. That you've hit the nail on the head there. Yeah.
But the pressure of the presidency was something that seemed to ring through for me, that he took a little while to kind of really get a hold of that early days, but then he got into a bit of a rhythm.
But with the mate, just on that, like the thing you never hear about. So there's a lot of criticism. Let's just take one of the calamities of his term, or the first term, the GFC, and making the decision on the, what do they call it? Starts with T.
You're talking about the bailout, or
the bailout. Can't remember the name. Anyway, the big bailout. They spent a bunch of money and basically tried to stimulate the system again and get that moving. And so, there's obviously a lot of criticism and everyone's very quick to point the fingers, particularly when not in the arena. But then it's like, well, what's the situation that plays out having not made that decision and maybe gone a more conservative approach, which was an alternative that was being, thrown around to not spend that much money into this and stimulate the system, and how would that path have led out? You don't know, and you just simply cannot know. And that's the problem with these kind of complex situations, is you can it's word opine until the cows come home, and it's just opinion at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, because it's just the complexity of these decisions. It's just I don't know how you can possibly grasp alternate realities in these situations.
Well, part of your job is to take responsibility for things you don't control. The economy is the most classic example in politics. Politicians shape the economy a little bit, and through regulation and things, they could shape it quite a lot, but over the medium term. And in terms of their term, they have very little effect on the economy, I believe. Yet it's probably the one thing that they're judged on most, that moves the needle most for voters. And that's just a classic example of, like, part of the job is just to, like, be blamed or praised for something that you can't control, and you just accept that.
Yeah, well, mate, the GFC is another classic example. It's like something that had been building up for 10 years, something like that. And then it's kind of the shift in, who's holding the office. And then there was no doubt quite a lot of blame that got rested on that administration simply because they've taken the keys. But the fact is they've had zero control over that kind of coming in and landing on their desk. Just as, I imagine, I can't think of any specific example, but say in the Trump presidency, he would have been dealing with a lot of on-flow effects from the actual Obama's administration, even up until now. These are at the policy level. These decisions take years and years and years to kind of trickle through into the system.
So the thing he learnt early on was that if the problem's got up to his level, it's a tricky problem, And he said, what I was quickly discovering about the presidency was that no problem that landed on my desk, foreign or domestic, had a clean 100% solution. If it had, someone else down the chain of command would have already solved it. Instead, I was constantly dealing with probabilities, which is where that kind of process probably comes in. But that's hard, So from what I can tell, the job is mainly about making those decisions, but then at the same time carrying the weight of them for everyone else and sort of keeping people upbeat and putting on a good face and kind of holding the space for people to feel all right about stuff, and taking it on your shoulders, which I guess is leadership, isn't it? But it particularly felt even more important for him.
Yeah. I think this is maybe where there might be some of that, legitimacy to that comment about people not, someone not being ready for this particular office. And in that sense, I would see the developing of a system for decision making, in this particular case, and Obama's system for making decisions as being a beast that he needs to build and needs to refine. And the only way that you can build and refine that beast is having that beast of a system be exposed to many different and increasingly complex events so that you can kind of build in for that complexity and how you handle it. And so maybe that's the kind of, it's almost like it's not that the person isn't ready, but they're kind of the systems that they've got behind them aren't ready to handle the kind of decision making that needs to be handled at this level. Because as you say, you can't just make, well, I think maybe we could possibly ignore the last 4 years, but you can't just make decisions from your gut feel on the, on what's going on and just run with it, because it feels like that's the thing you should do. It seems that to do a good job, it needs to come from a place of, a deeper system that you've been building across many years and that has been exposed to many different events.
Yeah. And you mentioned his cool demeanour.
Mm-hmm.
That seems
I just love that he plays hoops. Just like goes out, plays basketball with his like security detail, for a couple of games, just to cool off steam and throw a bit of banter around. That must have been good for your energy.
I think that, I think we've mentioned this before, but and Trump took the piss, let's be honest, but I'm sure they bake in, but the media gets all up about the president going and playing golf or whatever. Oh, he's slacking on the job, or Scott Morrison having a holiday, whatever you think about him, But the truth is that they bake these things into their schedules so that for resilience, it keeps them good. They have to do it, otherwise they go mad, It's sort of part of the deal. And it's probably a good lesson for someone like me.
Well, this is the thing, mate, is people criticise these leaders taking a holiday. They're like, what the fuck are you taking a holiday for? You shouldn't be taking a holiday. Well, I don't want someone governing wherever I'm living who hasn't taken a holiday, because I know how I perform if I haven't taken a holiday in a long time. It's like if you're working for 4 years straight with no holiday, you are going to be a disaster and you aren't going to be able to perform. And that's, I see that as a huge problem. So I think they should be able to take holidays. And if they can't take holidays and the system that they've got can't handle it and the whole bloody country or whatever falls apart, then there's a bigger problem.
Yeah. He effectively puts his calm nature down to training himself to take the long view and don't get too focused on the daily ups and downs, and stay focused on your goals and your longer term goals and how you're going towards them, which would be pretty hard considering all the noise that would come at you. And geez, you've got to be pretty tough to be the president. People just, the ability to take criticism from no one's happy, let alone some people, Whatever you do, you're disappointing some group of people, and, the rejections, the failures. I guess at the end of the day, you kind of get used to that, right?
I think that's one of the measures of success in itself, mate. It's if you don't have haters, then you haven't made it, and that's probably no more true in the public life that is politics. It's the ultimate kind of arena for having haters, but at the same time, and sadly, we're probably moving increasingly, or it seems to be that is over the last few years has moved towards more of that. Is that with the increased intensity of haters, for example, there is also an increased intensity of lovers, because there is people along the kind of various political spectrums, all everywhere along that spectrum in the world. There's every shape and color. So and so with that, I think you just need to kind of push through those moments of hate, but it's incredibly challenging because you don't. Well, I certainly don't face anything like that, and you can't imagine. Like you get put down by someone, or you cop a bad comment from somewhere. That's, you imagine copping that on the front page of every single newspaper across an entire country. Forever. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
You'd have to ignore it.
Yeah, you would. So what's your takeaway? What are you going to – I think this question, what will you change having read this book's relevant for this episode? Because there's a lot of information in there. What's one or two things that you'll take away and use from reading this?
Honestly, you can't beat that kind of another reinforcement of the decision-making, process and framework that he follows. Because, as I mentioned, that's very much mentioned in a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and it's this tie back. It's this like step back, and I love that double step back on decisions. So that for me, cool, mate, is incredible. To actually do that, take yourself out of the moment and just check yourself. It's almost like have a bit of that cool, calm nature to check yourself. And maybe that's why he's probably good at what he does, is that he does have that cool, calm nature. Therefore, he is able to take those two steps back that is required for his systemized process there.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And the other one, mate, is continue to listen to "Lose Yourself" by Eminem, because that was one of the routines we didn't pick up on from Obama, was that before he has any big event, he has a very set routine, and part of that routine, after some exercise and a set dinner that he has each time, is to put on some rap, usually "Lose Yourself" by Eminem or some Jay-Z. So pump up music.
It works.
It does.
I'll give him that.
What about you?
I reckon I've got three main ones. The first one is the decision-making framework that we discussed. So I won't back over that, but that's excellent. The second is to sort of like, take your seat, I'd call it. So his quote was, "If I wanted to be a president, I needed to act like one." And for him, he had this he was the president, So once he sort of accepted and sat back and took the chair and took his position and acted in that way, it just let everything else be. So if you're in a leadership position, you need to be able to accept that and own it. I think that's really good, and I'll be thinking about that and continuing to try and do that. And the last one is sort of what I talked about earlier about the almost spiritual position of being a president, is that you're Barack Obama and then the next day you're the president and you're Mr. President and you're Sir, and that culture has created a whole reverence around that position. That means whoever goes into it, the way that people act around them gives it the power and the meaning that it does. So I think that if you're building anything and you're creating teams and that sort of stuff, you need to define the positions and the rituals around the positions that give them the importance that you want. And I think that that's something that I'll be thinking about going forward. Not in the way to create a king, but it's more about what gives the positions in your company, tennis team, footy team, whatever, meaning, so that when the next person steps into it, they take that mantle.
Interesting. And so, mate, is there any insights you can glean for us there? Anything that you've kind of stormed out yet?
Nothing specific.
Or are you saving this for your next presidential campaign?
Politics isn't for me. So I really just got to the point of understanding that concept. So I think reading that book made me understand the creation. The United States didn't exist 500 years ago. So, someone's made all this stuff up. So
probably a bunch of people.
yeah. And the older it is, as we know, the more, kind of reverence
tried and
it gets.
tested it is. Yeah.
So, but someone the founding fathers created it. So I just sort of came across that idea. Well, I felt that theme throughout the book, and I thought that was quite interesting. And I haven't come into anything concrete about what to implement yet, but I feel like that idea of whatever it is, it should reflect what whatever, I use the word organisation here loosely, it doesn't have to be a company. I think it just probably needs to reflect the culture of the place in the first place. So if you have a really serious culture, if it probably should be something quite serious. If you have something that's a bit more of a jokey sort of thing, then whatever the rituals you put around the positions should probably be something like that. And I think that's probably my gut feel early on, but I haven't got anything more for you yet. Need to do some more thinking on it.
I like it. There's a nice bit of insight in that one, mate. I want to hear how that develops.
Keep you posted. Got a closing quote for it?
Yeah. So this is one that comes out of dealing with the Middle East crisis that he went through, and it was basically a battle of the egos between him and the probably not so much his ego, or at least that's the way he portrays it, and the Israeli Prime Minister, name escapes me, Lockie
Netanyahu.
Okay, all right. So
forgive the pronunciation.
No, mate, I like that you just threw it straight back over. So well done.
Said with confidence. That's the key.
Confidence. That's all that matters. If there's something we've learned from the last 4 years, that's all that matters. So looking back, I sometimes ponder the age-old question of how much difference the particular characteristics of an individual leaders make in the sweep of history. Whether those of us that rise to power are mere conduits for the deep, relentless currents of the times, or whether we're at least partly the authors of what's to come.
Yeah, that's a great quote. It just sums up this kind of thing he's battling with, I think.
Coming from the previous most powerful person in the world.
Well, that was a pleasure, mate.
Awesome. Cheers.